Hello and welcome to the magazine Nexus. Thank you for being here. Today we invite one of the American producer, Matthew Del Bigtree, former CBS medical journalist who checked the world with the movie Vaxxed in 2016. In 2025, he published a new movie, which called An Inconvenient Study. En français, c'est une étude qui dérange. A movie with a lot of new pieces of information about vaccines. We will talk about that. Just as a reminder, don't forget there is the paper, the Nexus magazine. You can have it also in the US if you want. You can go on nexus.fr and you can have it. And for everybody, I remind you, Café Nexus, where you can come and speak about politics, society, freedom of speech, and build as a thinker the world of tomorrow. So please come, and it's all the first Saturday of the month, 14h à 18h, 14 rue de Pâté. Let's go into this interview. Matthew Del Bigtree, thank you for being here. And we talk like we spoke before this interview. In this media, we talk a lot on this channel about pharmaceutical problems. What we do not understand, it is that everybody agrees there is problem with industries, but when it comes to pharmaceuticals and vaccines, people are like, oh no, there is no problem. Go your way, everything's fine. What is your analysis on this?
Well, we've all across the world, I think we should look at it more like a religion. We've been raised in a religion that vaccines make us healthier, that they're a critical part of life. And that starts from the day we're born. In America, we're giving a sexually transmitted disease vaccine, hepatitis B, on the first day of life. And then it continues. And it's just grown, right? I think one of the questions people should ask is, why was, when we were kids, when I was a kid, there was only 10 vaccines by the time I was 18 years old. If that was good, then why did I need 72 vaccines now for my children? What is changing? Are there viruses pouring out of the earth? Were we dying in huge numbers? We don't see any historical reference or reason we should be seeing this vaccine program increasing, other than it makes billions of dollars. And so I think that that's the first place we should just really sort of wake up, that this is just like any other industry. It's out to make money. And what I find fascinating, you're right, we'll question drugs, we'll question other products made by the pharmaceutical industry. In fact, if I stop someone on the street and say, do you trust the pharmaceutical industry? Most people say no. I mean, they're out for their own self-interest. They make billions of dollars. But when it comes to vaccines, we suddenly act like this is a different type of product, even though it's made by the same companies that lose lawsuits every year for lying about safety of drugs. Somehow we think there's a different group of people. I always joke that there's a wing on Merck's, corporation, or Pfizer or Sanofi Aventis, where only angels work, and they make this magical elixir called vaccines that are perfectly safe for everyone. When you really think about it, it's this simple. All of the same compounds you would find in a drug, you find in vaccines. You've got all sorts of, basic drug elements. But then you add on to those live viruses and bacteria and, like heavy metals like aluminum and mercury and polysorbate 80, things that no one logically would ever say could possibly make this product more safe. In fact, you'd have to guess that it makes them more dangerous. You have living microorganisms inside of these products. And so the work that I've done is just simply to get to the bottom of this. I think I've studied this more than any journalist in the world. I have sued the government of the United States to get to the bottom of this issue. My nonprofit that I started right after making Vaxxed in 2016, I have spent $28 million from this nonprofit suing mostly the government of the United States and the regulatory agencies And what we've discovered is not one of the childhood vaccines that are given to our children, those 72 to 80 vaccines, none of them was ever tested for safety using a double-blind placebo trial. That is now fact. And anyone that denies that is actually a science denier. And so we now find ourselves in a position in this world of grappling with a product that never proved it was safe. This statement, safe and effective, that we hear over and over and again is simply a slogan. It's a marketing term that has absolutely no basis in science. And that's a problem.
So it's interesting because the things that you go in the low side, the low way, makes us think, yeah. So you believe in what you do because this is why you can do this action. So it's really interesting because a lot of the people in the society in the US thinks that it's controversial, but that you are making this for money and everything. What do you respond on that?
I am just like any other consumer advocate that has ever been. We should want people like me challenging any product, challenging the safety of products, and we should want to see those industries actually, invite that challenge. Take up the opportunity to say, I'm glad you asked that question. Let us show you our evidence. Let us show you why it's safe. That is actually the scientific method. The scientific method demands that the challenger, anyone from any part of science, if you think about Galileo, right? Galileo challenged the established science that the earth was the center of the universe. We only now know that that's not true because he used the scientific method and said, I can prove you're wrong. And so, even with Galileo, we locked him in his house, put him under arrest because we didn't want to move towards the truth. But the science is supposed to say, yes, bring the biggest challenges to the front of the stage. We must answer them. If it's a theory and there's a new hypothesis, that should be addressed. If it's a product and anyone has a credible argument that maybe it's not safe or maybe it's not effective, that should be addressed immediately. That is science, and it demands that the question be answered. A religion is different. A religion calls anyone that challenges it a heretic. It tries to silence the question. It says you're not allowed here. You should be, censored, if you will. And so what we're watching around this vaccine discussion, even if people think I'm wrong, my questions should be answered. I have said, why has there never been a safety trial? Instead of them showing evidence in all of our newspapers, here's the safety trials, here's the links to those trials, they say Del is spreading misinformation, he must be censored. That's not the answer to that question. The answer is, here are those studies and show them to the world. They can't show you those, and so they're relying now on bullying the way a religion does to force us into a position. And so I, like anything else, I invite the challenge. I believe in the scientific method. If you want to challenge me, bring your evidence, show me the studies, and I will tell you this, you don't have them because I spent millions of dollars proving you don't have them. And so now the question is not, are there safety studies? We know there are not. The question is, how then can we prove they're safe? Where do we go from here? That is the question. And so, anyone that challenges me, good. This should be a discussion. What this should not be is hidden. It shouldn't be where no one's allowed to ask a question. That is when you have dangerous products that move forward. And I would ask you this, why is it the pharmaceutical industry ever loses a lawsuit if it is always telling us the truth? We should never assume we're being told the truth. The truth must be proven really on a daily basis. If there's a challenge, it must prove itself.
And so let's get into the process of this movie and this all the studies you made. It's like because at the beginning, like we say in the presentation, you were a medical journalist, and you say you trusted some of the medicine. You're not someone who were not trustful at the beginning. You trusted them, and after you one time you worked on an adverse effect, and you ask who had the adverse effect in vaccine and everything, and you hundred of people stood up. What can you tell? Is this a moment that shocked you?
Yes, I always talk about when my film Vaxxed was released, and that was just about one vaccine, the MMR vaccine. This was back in 2016, and its connection to autism, and very specifically, a study that happened inside the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC in America, one of our biggest, health agencies. We had a whistleblower that came forward and said we were committing scientific fraud. He was actually the analyst on that study. And when our film opened up in New York, there was a line down the block. We'd been kicked out of Tribeca Film Festivals. We were like removed from the festival for being too controversial. But that made a lot of excitement. And so the first day we were screening in New York, there's a line down the block, and I wanted to know who was coming to see the film. And so I asked a question after the film had screened of the packed audience there. Will everyone with an autistic, like a vaccine injured autistic child, please stand up? And 3/4 of the audience stood up. 75% of the audience stood up. And I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. I knew I was making a documentary about an issue. I just didn't know how big this issue was. And so I asked that question every screening, 4 or 5 screenings every day, 5 to 7 days a week for an entire year all across America. And every single time, nearly 75% of the audience stood up. And so what I realized was this is a much bigger issue than anyone's talking about. And then outside of the theaters, people that had seen the film wanted to tell their own stories. So we started recording those. I've recorded over 1,000 vaccine injury stories that year, but it wasn't just autism. People were saying, my baby died immediately after a vaccine. My teenage child has been paralyzed ever since they got the HPV Gardasil vaccine. Or a really popular one, my child never made it to the MMR vaccine that your film is about. My child regressed into autism after the DTaP vaccine, the diphtheria, tetanus, and acellular pertussis. And here's what I want to say very simply. When we are told vaccines are safe and effective, that means they're completely safe for everybody. As soon as I started this investigation, I realized that there's a warning label that is never seen by the public. It is wrapped around the vaccine, it ships in the box, but no one has ever shown that warning label. Even though with drugs, a doctor has to tell us all of the potential side effects. And if we have one of those side effects, they immediately take us off that drug. Our doctors are not telling us there's side effects to vaccines. And so as soon as I opened up that insert and started reading, you're reading paralysis, things like Guillain-Barré syndrome, transverse myelitis, paralysis from vaccines, multiple sclerosis being caused by vaccines. And the one I'm the most focused on, encephalitis, swelling of the brain, which can lead to all sorts of disorders, certainly a brain injury that I think we refer to as autism. And so when we think about this question, this is how I talk to politicians now in America. I say there's no such thing as a product that is perfectly safe for everybody, not one that we ingest or that we inject. I would say I could, in a stadium full of people, if you took a soccer stadium, I probably couldn't find a piece of food that everyone in that stadium could eat where someone doesn't have an allergic reaction. Well, let's just look at vaccines just like that with everything else. And what I say is the question is not if they injure people. We know that they do. The question is how many people are being injured. And this is the question no one wants to face and has been really the body of my work. And the more I look, and this film, An Inconvenient Study, I think is the closest we're going to get to having a sense of how many children are being injured by vaccines. And it appears now to be more people are being injured by vaccines than the diseases that we're vaccinating for. So when we look at the death rate, for instance, of measles vaccines in America, it was about 500 people died every year from measles. But now through multiple studies, I'd show we know that catching measles as a child reduces your heart disease by 10 to 20%. That would save 200,000 lives every year if we just let people catch the measles. It actually primes women so that they don't get ovarian cancer. It reduces ovarian cancer by 50%. Having measles as a child. When we vaccinate, we're taking away this natural protective effect that having these infections. I want people to think about it. It's sort of like going to the gym, right? If you're lifting weights, your body gets stronger. When you catch these illnesses, your immune system gets stronger, so it fights things like cancer and heart disease in the future. We are making our species weaker by like creating an immunity without actually using the immune system and working it out. I think that's a big issue there. But this study really, what I love about this film is if I was wrong, the best way to figure that out is to use the scientific method. I went to a scientist that disagreed with me. I went to a scientist at Henry Ford Health, and I challenged him to do a study. He believed vaccines were the greatest invention of all times. And I said, all right, prove me wrong. I disagree. Do a study that compares the health outcomes of vaccinated children to completely unvaccinated children. And lucky for the world, he agreed to do that study. And that is what's the heart of this film. Now, the problem is, once he got the results, he refused to show the world. He refused to publish that study. And so that's the controversy around this film, is that he was, I believe, my opinion is he was so horrified by the results, which were the most damning indictment of vaccines we've ever seen. It showed that children are 2.5 times more likely to have chronic disease if they've been vaccinated compared to the kids that were not vaccinated. They had 6 times the rate of neurodevelopmental disorders like speech delays and all the problems that we're seeing. 6 times, not 6%, not 60%, like a 600% increased risk if you were vaccinated. There's about 5 to 6 times the rate of ADD, ADHD, and autoimmune disease. So all of these issues like diabetes and things like that, that we're seeing skyrocketing. So the study showed that in every category that matters, the vaccinated are much sicker than the unvaccinated. And that study is done by someone trying to prove me wrong. I think that's what makes this so fascinating.
Yeah, because it's really interesting. It's the study of the Dr. Marcus Zervos. And which is interesting is when you watch the movie, you ask yourself, if I took the side of your opponent, I don't think we say opponent, yeah?
Yeah.
Of your opponent, we can say, okay, just one studies. It's even if it's one study, there is many other study that say the contrary. But in reality, when we see all your work with these 2 movies, there is way more than just one movie. Actually, the one of Dr. Zervos came way after, and it's all the before work were already done. What is your opinion on that?
So, I mean, I think there's several things to look at here. To begin with, as I make the point in the film, there is not a single other study in the world that has compared vaccinated children's health to completely unvaccinated children that didn't come to the same conclusion. There's about 10 to 12 studies around the world that has done this comparison. Every single one shows the vaccinated are sicker than the unvaccinated. So this study, I think, is so important because it's the first time the study is being conducted by someone that proclaims to be pro-vaccine and believes in the vaccine program is setting out to prove that the vaccinated are healthier. Now, that's not just my opinion. What makes this film brilliant is when Dr. Zervos would not publish this study, I asked him to go to dinner and explain to me why, and I wore hidden cameras and recording equipment. So the film is fascinating because you hear an honest conversation between myself and Dr. Zervos, and he says all the things I'm telling you. He tells you it's as good a study. He can't understand why the results are what they are. And he says, I would publish this, except that it would be the end of my career. He talks about the culture we live in where you are attacked for, questioning this, as I call it, really, an indoctrination or a religion around vaccines. So look, people should watch the film. It's free for everyone in the world. All they have to do is go to inconvenientstudy.com. We have the French versions there. We have Japanese now there, Polish. I mean, I'm traveling around the world. But to your point, why isn't the French government has never compared vaccinated children to unvaccinated children? Why has the US government never done this study? Why hasn't Germany or Japan done this study? Certainly, if vaccines are as great as they say they are, that study should be the easiest study to do. Yet every time it's done, it shows that vaccines are actually doing the opposite. They're making us more sick. And so all I'm saying is the only way now to refute what you see in this study, to refute the Henry Ford study, is, again, someone's going to have to do this exact study and show us that they're getting a different result. You can certainly poke holes in this study. It's a retrospective study. So it studies children that have already made the decisions that they've made. And so there's arguments against this, that it wasn't controlled. But I explained in the movie, the only time you can do a controlled study is before the product is on the market. And they skipped that. They skipped that safety study. And so we are now stuck in this world where all we have is retrospective studies. And I offer up to the world, as I think you know, I was director of communications for Robert Kennedy Jr., who's now HHS secretary in the United States. I ran the media for his presidential campaign. And, he is trying to do a study inside of the American database, just like this movie, but he's running into a lot of obstacles because all the scientists around him are fighting him. And why? Why are they fighting him doing this study? Shouldn't they all say, hey, we know how this is going to turn out. We love vaccines and we know they're safe. Why is it he is being attacked for trying to compare vaccinated to unvaccinated kids? There's something really suspicious about that reaction.
We are almost in the at the end of this interview. So I have so many questions where it's better to have a short conversation. We hope to welcome you in the future in this channel. For us, it's been 10 years we work on those type of problem. There was the COVID vaccine campaign, le pass sanitaire, like we call it in France, where you cannot go to shop if you are not vaccinated and everything. So there was a lot of debate. What do you think? I want to have your opinion on how can we debate? How can we talk about this on society? How do you, what is your opinion on that? It's been now 10 years, more than 10 years you work on this. And by the way, one of my question, I give you all my question and you answer it like you want, because we run out of time. What I want to know, it's how do you keep doing what you do? I know what is it to have it's not about social status that we are doing what we are doing. It's not about recognition. I don't know how do we say in English, but it's not about reputation, because obviously the reputation, you have better reputation when you learn how to shut up. So yeah. So what if you can inspire people who can do what you will do, or the future young journalist French that will have this choice, this decision, like I did, like so many people did. How do you keep doing what you do?
To begin with, at the heart of journalism is the same foundational principle as the heart of science. In America, the media is referred to as the fourth estate or the fourth branch of government. The founding fathers of America said if we ever lose a free press, if that press is ever owned by institutions or government bodies or corporations, then the people will lose one of the most important strongholds for freedom that exists. I believe that that has happened in America. I believe our press is now, almost completely owned by industrial or corporate interests, especially the pharmaceutical industry. In America, the pharmaceutical companies can advertise on our television, and they spend between 50 to 70% of all of the money that goes into our television comes from the pharmaceutical industry, which means that every news agency on our television is being funded primarily by the pharmaceutical industry. And then behind that would be oil and gas. And so we don't get clear perspectives on war because we're fighting wars for the oil and gas industry that is funding our news agencies. So we're getting their versions of this story. And we don't get the truth on vaccines or pandemics like COVID because our news is being funded by the corporation that's making $100 billion off of the COVID vaccine. Now, I know there's a lot of opinions about President Trump. And I ended up, as I said, I supported Robert Kennedy Jr. running for president. He was my first choice. It became clear at the end of that election when Trump was offering to Robert Kennedy Jr. to come in and help with the health problems of America and the regulatory agencies, that was going to be our best opportunity to fix the problems that, as you pointed out, I've been focused on for 10 years. And for people that struggle with how could you align with President Trump, I say I am a one-issue voter, and that issue is not vaccines. That issue is freedom of speech. In America, that is our First Amendment right. We have a constitution built around our ability to speak and the freedom to say whatever we think and whatever we feel and express whatever opinion we have. If we lose that right to speak, if the government can censor us, then we have no freedom at all. There's not a single issue that I can stand up for or fight for if my government can silence me. And so I voted on that one issue. Donald Trump believed in free speech, whereas Joe Biden and then ultimately Kamala Harris were running on the fact that they were going to end misinformation. And that misinformation they were talking about were people like me that proved the COVID vaccine did not stop transmission. Our government said it was 95% effective at stopping the spread of COVID, yet it was 0% effective. Everyone that's received that vaccine has caught COVID, and oftentimes 2 and 3 times, and now they're on their 10th booster shot because it doesn't work. So I was censored for saying this product was not designed to stop transmission. I didn't guess. I showed people the FDA science in the Pfizer trials. And just so you know, there was a lawsuit against the FDA to release all of the Pfizer trial data. And the FDA was trying to stop that for 75 years. I think this made world news. That was my lawsuit. My nonprofit sued and we won. So the world can now read all of the Pfizer trial data. We also won the Moderna trial data, and we won the CDC's V-Safe data, which was an app they gave to people to track their health. And so I am fighting for transparency, and I'm fighting for the right to be able to speak. My understanding is in France, you can be censored. Your social media in Europe, based on European Union rules, is now censoring people and their opinions, which is the end of a democracy. That is the end of free speech. A democracy can only work if we hear all of the opinions and they're all presented in front of us, and then we follow, the truth that makes sense to us. When the
Yeah.
government gets to decide what is truth, then now that is a dictatorship. It's an authoritarian government. And my concern, and why you asked, why am I still doing this? I realized, I was just in France, and I was in Poland, and I was in Italy and in Japan. And the truth is, we're all suffering from the same problem. There's a globalist authoritarian, government, if you will, that is attempting to take over the world, which I realized as I was traveling, I'm no longer on an investigation about vaccines. Vaccines is just a way I believe this authoritarian government will control our bodies, control our population, control who can have children and who can't, who will be healthy and who won't. And we don't have time to get into all the details of that, but it's just one aspect of a global governance that I think is the most dangerous, progressive move in the world. And I being in France, frankly, you see the problem with it. The European Union is trying to govern for many different nations that have different strengths, different abilities, different cultures. And when we pasteurize everything that you're all the same beings, we lose what makes humanity dynamic. We lose what's great. We lose what makes France special. We lose what makes Italy special and different. The same is true in America in many ways. We try to keep our government localized as much as possible because our farmers in Kansas have very different needs and desires and have to have different politics to support them than the city urban bankers in New York. And to treat them exactly the same with the same rules, the same laws, the same taxes makes no sense. And so this move to a European Union is taking away France's voice. You no longer can vote. It's easier to change your prime minister in France than it is to change the head of the European Union. You have no control over that. And it's going to be even worse when it becomes a global governance, a one world government. None of us will have any control, and it will dictate to all of us exactly the same. And so I am here. I don't care what anyone says about me. I am fighting for the future of my children. It's a very selfish, if you will, a mission that I'm on. I'm trying to uphold freedom so that my 17-year-old son and my 12-year-old daughter get to live in the same freedom that I was raised in, where I get to decide how I'm educated. I get to decide how I eat. I get to decide what's injected into my body or not injected into my body. I get to decide whether I have a surgery or not. I get to decide who I vote for. And I can speak outwardly about my opinions and meet other people that share my value system. We are losing that ability. And the vaccine program is just the best example of this. And I say this, if I do not control what goes into my body, there is no other freedom left. I have lost control of my own body. So if the government can inject me with a product I have no control over, or forcibly inject my children, then we are property of the government. We are not free, sovereign individuals. Our rights are being reduced to the same rights as farm animals. And so right now in France, you are being treated like farm animals. In many of the states here in America that force and mandate vaccines without any way out, we are being treated like farm animals. In Japan, they're being treated like farm animals. We must stop this immediately. I am not trying to get rid of vaccines. I am trying to say you should choose when you want a vaccine, how many vaccines you want. And if someone else is making that choice, you are no longer a free citizen. And that matters to me more than anything in the world. I am fighting for freedom.
Well, it was a strong words, and thank you. I think it can inspire people continue the same type of action and to fight for each other is a good reason to protect our own rights. So it's good. By the
Let
way,
me,
you know the yeah
let me make one more point before I
yeah
finish. Around the world, as I've traveled, between 15 to 30% of most of our countries refuse to take the COVID vaccine. There is a rebellion deep inside. And then the people that did receive the vaccine, how many of them only did it because they couldn't
yeah
work or they couldn't
mm,
do it? They were forced to do it. I say this because when you study history, right around 13% of a population, if they're passionate, has changed every political system, every giant political upheaval that has ever happened in history throughout the world was when 13% got loud and spoke out and stood up for what they believed in. So my point is, in France, I know at least 15% of you are rejecting that vaccine. You want your freedom. Same thing in America, it was 30% did it. In Poland, it's 50%. If we speak up, we outnumber them. We have all the people we
yeah
need to change our politics right now. But just like slave owners, they've made us afraid to speak to each other. They've made us feel that we're all alone. And that makes us feel afraid. That makes us feel weak. We must recognize that if we actually speak out, there are enough of us to change this world and the trajectory we're on right now.
Yeah, but it's really interesting what you say, but it's way more complicated than that. How do you see the how do you see the thing? Maybe in the US in general, because in France we are in this point where now me I like to talk with everybody. I like to create debate. I like to confront opinions. I do what you said earlier. But the thing is now, because in France we have everything. It's mainstream media, like we say, they talk about adverse effect of the COVID vaccine, where they said we were fools back in 2021, crazy, no, no, no. No, it was we saw adverse effect on the woman period, I think, and
Yeah,
everything. So yeah, we saw everything. Now they talk about this, and now we have pharmacovigilance. I don't know how we say in, but it's
yes.
like the observer, yeah, of the yeah, and they talk about serious adverse effect. They show it. They show the link with some old injury that disappeared from France that came back, like maladie de Charcot, and came back now in because of the campaign. But it's that, so there is everything. So when you talk with people, they are like this. They are like what you say. Oh yeah, I did it to keep my job. I did it to go to the restaurant. No, 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 no. But I am when they you want to have a serious debate, they are like they started to collapse because they know it's in their blood, maybe. So it's really we are. It's maybe one of the first time in the history that it's so difficult to have a debate because people can talk of something they have a bomb, maybe they have in their blood. So how do you approach debate on this? How do you create this? How do you prevent people to not collapsing?
Well, you make a really good point. And even in America, we look up to France in your ability to rebel, right? You're known for taking to the streets. We don't really do that as well as you do. But I sit in shock that of all the issues you go to the streets with, having your bodies contaminated by an experimental product that is now very dangerous, this didn't really drive as many people to the streets. Wear the yellow jackets on the
Yeah.
vaccine issue, and you're right. But I would say this, to begin with, it is very scary, I think, to have to address an issue that now is in your body. There are many ways to detoxify that I talk a lot about on my show,
Mm.
thehighwire.com. People should be doing that. But what we must say is, and here's where I think the conversation has to be, we know this was a dangerous vaccine, but there are more coming and more going to be forced into us if we don't say enough is enough. If we are silent now after we know this mistake has been made, then we will keep allowing this mistake to be made. The pharmaceutical industry has not stopped developing mRNA technology. It is a failed technology. It is incredibly dangerous. But all in all, what I would say the conversation is not whether or not vaccines are good or which ones are good or bad. Simplify the conversation to where I have. Just simply say, don't you wish you'd have had a choice whether you got that COVID vaccine? Don't you believe that should be your choice? And by the way, don't you believe it should be your choice whether you get another booster or not? We are about to live in a world where we never have that choice again, not for our children and not for adults. And this is important too, because I think we think of the vaccine mandate as on our children. What we're realizing, what COVID taught us is they have a forced vaccine program for every adult too. And that is where I approach people. Do you want to be forced to take 10, 20 vaccines every year? Do you want more COVID vaccines forced into you? Most people will say no. Well, then we need to all get together and start standing up for freedom, standing up for our right to choose, telling our politicians, where do you stand on vaccine mandates, on forcing vaccines? Because I'm not going to vote for you if you force me to vaccinate. I want to have leadership that trusts me and my ability to make my own choices. Make this conversation about our own intellectual ability, our own right to make our choices, and only use COVID as an example. How many more times will our bodies survive this if we don't get in control of this decision? And that's where I think we should have the debate, not on how dangerous is the product, but shouldn't we all have had a choice?
That is perfect. Thank you for your words, and it's really true. We can say, okay, even if you got the vaccine, you can still get detoxified, like you say. So it's still time. So get to the point when the time is still time. You can do action for yourself and for your health. Thank you, Matthew Del Bigtree. Thank you again, and don't go to see on the internet an Inconvenient Studies. You will get deeper in this subject with this movie. By the way, it's a really good documentary, because I don't like documentary where there is so much dramatic music and everything, and this one, it's really good. So it's for all public, so you can watch it with everyone, no problem. By the way, the paper Nexus magazine, you can have the last number, and you can get it into your house on nexus.fr. Don't hesitate. And Cafe Nexus, there is one in August also. Matthew Del Bigtree, was a really good discussion. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.